How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great episode today. We're going to talk about the promise of effort, why commitment matters more than guarantees and corrections. And guys, this isn't really between just us as individuals or different departments. It's more about what we translate to the public. Are we translating false promises? Or are we translating committed effort? Right now, we have to build trust. And trust comes with some level of transparency behind the effort of our work and not making false promises into outcomes that we truly don't have in our control to produce. Sad thing is when people buy into false promises because that's what we're selling them, then even when we have a reason, they see it as an excuse. So once you have good trust in the effort, the public understands what effort is about. We ourselves understand the effort based on trust because we're transparent and we have that level of trust. Eventually, what people see as excuses become reasons. And it's just a great way to move forward with what's needed in corrections. We need trust. We need to be transparent with our efforts so we don't get swept up by false promises. All right, so my guest today is going to be Russ Hamilton. And guys, don't forget, I got books on the market. I got Inmate Manipulation Decoded, Breaking Boundaries, both available on Amazon. And if you go to blue360media.com, you'll see a bunch of my other books on the market. I believe there's about 5 of them there. And I have a new one coming out. You could pre-purchase it now, and it's for rookie staff. And it should be coming out at the end of April. So again, go to blue360media.com. and check out those books. And I believe they're stepping into training now. So you may be able even to check out what type of programs they have for training for staff. All right. What up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name's Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections. I've also been a senior juvenile correctional officer. And currently, I work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail where I'm the case manager and for a local county probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook, and that's a venue and a group that's dedicated, to training, information, knowledge, camaraderie, mentorship, and everything else for any corrections professional employee.
Thank you for all you do. Now, Russ, I got some bullets here. I'll go over some bullets, and then I have the discussion question in which we'll both break down, and that's for each section of this topic. So again, the title is The Promise of Effort, Why Commitment Matters More Than Guarantees in Corrections. And basically, the first part I got is setting the record straight, the public versus reality. So you got the public often assumes correctional facilities should operate flawlessly, especially if they believe staff is doing their job well. So they judge you based on the outcome. There's a misconception that no incident should occur, no violence, escapes, contraband, or emergencies. Corrections deals with unpredictable human behavior. The goal is to manage risk and maintain control, not to eliminate all problems. Control isn't guaranteed. It's earned and maintained shift by shift, and success comes from presence, awareness, and effort, not perfection. So the key takeaway here is that correctional work is not about flawless control. It's about maintaining order through consistent human effort in an unpredictable environment. So why do you think the public often expects perfection? Why do you think the public often expects perfection from corrections? And what should they really understand about the true nature of our work behind the walls?
I think that when you have a question like that, I think that the public operates from a position of projecting what they would be like in corrections as an inmate. And I think that they're so far off the mark because, what we deal with is not diluted problematic individuals, but condensed problematic individuals Everything that we do, is predicated on the fact that every single one of our inmates that we have in there has the potential to be a problem. That doesn't mean that they're all, within the same strata of violence and acting out and so forth. But how they got to where they are, whether it's a jail or whether it's a prison, is because of all of the past things that they've done and continue and recur to do. So it's just not possible to have a population set that's entirely composed of angels.
For me, Russ, you know what I love what you're saying. So I'm going to kind of feed off that. This is what made me think of the effort over the outcome. I think that when the media has painted such a biased perspective of us that unfortunately there's no trust in what we do. So basically, even when we do have a concern, it's a legit concern of maybe why we can't produce a certain outcome, that concern becomes an excuse. And now, unfortunately, because there's no trust, people don't buy into an exhaustive effort. Also, I think the lack of accountability towards the inmate population. I feel that the inmate population is allowed a lot more forgiveness, and yet they could be the center for most of the problems that we are dealing with. So having said that, when the accountability is kind of always pushed on the staff and they're the one to blame, then it shifts the onus of responsibility and accountability of the people who are actually causing the concerns. That always seems to be an issue too. So again, this is not an effort to shift blame, but it's a good effort to paint a picture that sometimes we may not have control of an outcome that people are expecting us to produce. So we will go ahead and commit to an effort as best we can. But if we constantly sit there and put a level of accountability over the outcome in which that accountability truly belongs to the individual who's causing the concern, then you put an impossible situation on us to manage, if you will. So I agree. I think that unfortunately, if we had more trust, then people would see our exhausted efforts. And then if we couldn't reach an outcome because we have trust, they would see it as a valid reason and then try to work with us to better whatever approach we're trying to get to a resolution. But since we don't have the trust and accountability is shifted in the wrong direction, and when I say accountability, I'm not saying accountability about the job being done, but rather accountability about who's responsible for the problem. Then the problem is when we have a reason and a real justified reason, that reason literally gets minimized to an excuse. And then we're back in this circle of being blamed. Does that make sense, Russ, before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but I think that when especially the public, but sometimes even professionals such as ourselves, I've seen fall down with regard to this, and they see a video or something on the internet, and then people start picking it apart and giving their relatively uninformed opinion with regards to it, and they don't know the totality of the circumstances. They've never had training in it, and so it just becomes amateur hour. And I don't think that they really understand the gravity of situations that we face each day. And I think that they're just also inured because they see the violations, the mistakes that we make are always put on display, and they don't see the millions of successes that we have on a day-to-day basis. That's never paraded before them.
Yeah, and I wish we had control of that narrative. So the next section I got here, Russ, is I got why guarantees fail in corrections. So guarantees sound good. You get politics, I guess, but don't reflect the reality staff face daily. Promising a contraband-free or incident-free environment sets up unrealistic expectations. When guarantees are broken, it damages trust and morale. It encourages hiding problems instead of addressing them. Guarantees discourage transparency and accountability. And what works is consistent effort and honest communication. What's the key takeaway? So false guarantees or false promises damage trust. Effort, transparency, and action are the real standards of professionalism. So, Russ, how do unrealistic guarantees hurt correctional operations and morale? And why is it so important that we set a standard based on commitment instead of perfection?
If you want to actually see what's going to fail, all that you ever have to do is put it in the presence of inmates. And we've seen these things go on so many times that your idea about thinking that a guarantee is even possible, right, is going to be immediately met with failure, as soon as you expose it to real world conditions, is the way that I like to put it. So when you're trying to say that, hey, we're going to suddenly meet with success, on a battlefield, that goes back over time as far as we can see, with no real huge margins of success, you're fooling yourself. And I mean that with regards to, even when we talk about rehabilitation, which I'm a proponent of, the margins are reed thin on that. I'm reminded when, we were having a real influx of cell phones into our institution, and the company that was providing the outgoing calls from our payphone bank, they said, "Oh, well, we're gonna set up a way to block those," and so they set up this interception system, and the inmates figured out, within a matter of a couple of weeks, how to block that and to go around and to still set up their smuggled in cell phones to be able to get out. And there was something right back then that I predicted that it's just not going to work. They are innovative at an astonishing level, and so our ideas about how we're suddenly going to be successful with a brand new toy or a brand new idea or this or that, is really predicated on not being exposed to the problem enough, not having enough experience to know that we can make inroads, we can do things that help, but the idea that we can guarantee that something's going to get better or work in a more productive fashion is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. I saw that pause. Is that the dog?
Yeah, I was waving to my wife who's about to feed my dog.
Yeah, I hear
no,
the dog.
He's lying about having eaten.
Hey, you know what, Russ? Everything you're saying
he hasn't eaten. I'm sorry.
Everything it's okay. Everything you're saying is so spot on, because obviously, the more pressure you put on one road to deter, let's say contraband, for example, only forces the inmate to detour into another road, a less discoverable road. So, I mean, to be honest with you, we prevent, we react, but it is a cat and mouse game. You ask any frontline officer who's working in corrections, and they'll tell you, we do our best to prevent. We do our best to react, so you don't get the negligence. But the more pressure you put in one area, the more it leaks somewhere else. Now, also, I find this out to be true when it comes to the false promises, guys. Sadly, a false promise people buy into so much because in their mind it produces an outcome. So then you have the pressure of an outcome in which most of these people, that politicians, whatever it is, they want that outcome. So what they do is they'll lean into a false promise because that's what sells, and then sadly the committed effort gets kind of minimized. I rather believe in that false promise. Sadly, now here's the thing: it becomes all about vanity now, and it truly does. That's why when shit starts to hit the fan, that person who made that false promise, that person who made that false guarantee into an outcome that they could not deliver because it wasn't in their control, does whatever they could to cover everything up that's not going in their direction, because they're more concerned about how they look, because they honestly set a promise that they can't keep. And, and us in corrections, we see that. We know when there's a false promise being tossed to the public, and then we know we're going to be the end result of that false promise. We're going to be the ones that are going to be yelled at and scrutinized because we can't produce what wasn't ours to decide, what we weren't put into a discussion about. So now everything is being done, not what's best for the individual, or not what's best for the facility, or not what's best for the inmates, or not what's best for staff, but what's best for the individual who needs to save face. And I think part of that is also the struggle that we're facing in corrections. Somewhere along the line, there was a false promise put out there, and now everybody here is working not what's best for what I said, the facility, the agency, the inmate, staff, but rather the person's vanity. Truly, the person's vanity. Someone tossed out a false promise into the world, and at the end of the day, it's not even about effort anymore. It's about, I got to look good. And the biggest concern about that, and I'm sure Russ would may like to add on this, is that now what happens here is when there's that false promise out in the world, that person looks to protect their image, so they hide the true problems. And now the public only gets a perspective of what is being shared to them, and not the true effort that has been leading to either failures or slight successes. And again, that's where outcome-driven versus effort-driven matters, because now you got someone that's hiding all the concerns more to protect their vanity than it is for anything else. And now we're in survival mode because people are expecting an outcome, because now that false promise becomes layers of other false promises and hiding information. And what we're doing on the front line is you wind up struggling, trying to do your best. And when you can't produce, someone comes up and says, well, they're just lying. Well, what do you mean they're lying? They're just coming up with excuses because I spoke to someone who made us a promise, who never worked in the system, by the way, who made us a promise that this could be done. And it's like, wow. And where were we in that promise? Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many facets to it, and that's why when we talk about effort, effort is important, but effort can also be wasted on promises that are made where once again, I always say this, where the margins are read thin. Sometimes it's just bad effort that's put in after good effort.
I agree. And guys, that little piece of advice here before we get to number 3 is, at least for people that are watching this that are at a higher level, or maybe the public when they start to pressure for some outcomes, remember, in corrections, we could put the effort in, but when people start telling you promises and promises and promises, you got to really, take that with a grain of salt. It's very hard to promise anything in corrections when you're dealing with human behavior. All right, let's go to the next one. So now this is good. It's what does effort really look like? So I got effort goes beyond showing up. It's emotional, it's mental, it's ethical. I mean, some examples: simply just doing your rounds thoroughly, documenting accurately, and correcting behavior early. That's just some examples. Staying calm in conflict and treating others fairly. Remaining consistent even when frustrated or exhausted. And it's about professionalism when no one's watching. Key takeaway: effort is the foundation of the job. It's consistent, quiet, and often unseen, but absolutely essential. So, Russ, what does real effort look like in a correctional setting, and how do staff manage to maintain it, especially on the most difficult of days?
So this is where a lot of us that go into work on a day in and day out basis, we recognize that there's a series of functions that we always have to do, that we always have to engage in, and then there's some other facets of those efforts where we have to go in, and we have to go in above and beyond even that's what's expected. Unfortunately, a lot of times the things that are expected, have been, accepting a lower and lower standard as we go in. So yes, the first thing that you have to do is, you have to be in the right mindset. You have to go in there, to interdict contraband, to safely serve the morning meal, for instance, or the evening meal, or whatever it is that you have to be, going in there and I always called it, chasing felonies, because that's the way I considered myself to be most effective, as an impact player, and to be looking for the things that impact safety and security. And so we do all of those things. And then as we're doing those, though, we also have to break off and account for the other things that must be done. Programming for reentry and rehabilitation purposes, providing a constitutional level of medical care and getting them to where they're supposed to be, and doing all of these other things that are, sometimes in my mind somewhat dubious as to whether they're effective or necessary, or if we're just, carrying out some type of, political aggrandizement, to say, hey, look what I've done, and making corrections better. So all of those things truly go into it, but mostly our effort has to be about accomplishing the mission. I think that sometimes people become, somewhat jaundiced or negative in their viewpoint, because what happens is we have a mission, but then what happens with regards to, politics, and sometimes administrative and managerial things that are, passing this stuff on down, is we get mission creep, and suddenly we're expected to be all things to all people all of the time, every day. And I think that kind of blunts what our effort actually produces. And I think that, that does set us up for us not fulfilling on, these promises that some other people make.
Russ, again, you're just so on point, man, because, even from the management level, we deal with a lot of lawsuits that could come in. And usually the lawsuit, people, they see the DOC as a cash cow. And then sometimes you see people who aren't even involved in the inmate's life all of a sudden come in and try to get that lawsuit when they see that maybe a generalized outcome wasn't produced, like the overall safety and security. And they push on the outcome so much because they don't want anyone to focus on the effort, because they're looking for negligence. So when we get brought, to challenge the circumstance, we wind up focusing more on the effort, and it's funny because the effort is where it all matters to me. The effort is the reaction to who should be held accountable, if that makes sense. So when you eliminate the effort and you focus things on the outcome, the accountability could shift. The accountability could go from the individual who we were trying to stop now becomes the victim. And now we're negligent because we didn't produce the overall final outcome of what was promised, which was a guarantee of safety and security. Now, granted, I get most people think that corrections is responsible for that guarantee. Yeah, we are up to a certain point. We can't control people's behaviors. I mean, you could protect the person, but then eventually they're going to make their own choices and they fall back into bad habits. And eventually it's only a matter of time, So what we try to do is we try to maintain some good, positive momentum, but we to be accountable for someone else's choices past a certain level. It's like, okay, guys, you got to realize something. Eventually, the more we try to do what we can, which includes personal accountability or some level of deterrence, the more they start becoming more secretive with those behaviors. The more it becomes harder to detect, because now they know that we're on to them. Drug use, or inmates that may find themselves owing money. Usually those addictions that people think are victimless crimes. Well, in a prison, drug addictions, gambling addictions. They run up some serious money, and we try our best to get on top of it, but it's hard. And then eventually the inmate starts doing it in secret, and then it becomes even harder to catch. And then, at one moment, the person just makes that last foolish choice, and we're not able to react. So I think, what effort really looks like basically still needs to be translated to the public. And I think that doesn't come on the back end of a false promise, but rather, hey, I know that this was the outcome you expected. So why don't we show you the efforts that we made to try to produce that outcome that you wanted? But now I can also show you what was the obstacle that was stopping it. Because here's the thing. If you just focus on the outcome and you don't focus on the effort, you eliminate the obstacle. And the obstacle is where the accountability lies. I truly agree with that. I think the obstacle is where the accountability lies that prevents the effort from producing the outcome. So if I was, let's say in a court case, and I'm one of the people that can make that decision of whether the agency's right or wrong or whatever it is, I would look at where the effort was and where the obstacle was. Where is that level of accountability that led to the outcome not being able to be produced? And you'll find out most of the time, if people are willing to dig in that deep, also with the connection to the understanding of the work that needs to be done and other concerns, a contextual look, then you'll find that most of the obstacles usually comes because the accountability may go towards the person that for some reason people are seeing as a victim, but they fail to paint the other side. The person that caused the problem could be the person that unfortunately in this time is the victim of the circumstance they created. And at our point, all we're trying to do is maintain some level of control. But, every time you go to push for more assertive control, they get around it. Like Russ said, Russ used a great word before, innovative. The most innovative inmates that you'll find in the system are the inmates that have nothing. Russ, anything before we go to the next section?
Yeah, this is, just so people know, corrections is replete with this kind of thing that we get, pushed from the top down. Most recently here in California, they decided that, a little while back, that they were going to, change some of the rules with regards to some of these inmates, going to, family, overnight visits. And so what they did is they made it, so that some of these, hyper violent, criminals could go on their family visits, And so, what is the expectation there, for, people at the line staff level? How do they make that safe? And the answer is that they don't, they can't, they're not given any of the things that they need to do, which is actually restricting and not letting hyper-violent individuals have those type of, overnight family visits. And so then when we end up with a dead visitor, who do they blame? Are they blaming the politicians, or are they, blaming the staff, at that particular prison? And that's the easy way for them to go is to blame the staff. They give you, you get given an ingredient to make a meal with. The main ingredient that they want you to use is shit. The meal's not going to turn out nice.
Right, true. And Russ, you know why it's good to have this topic right now? Because there could be some people from the outside that will look at this and believe that everything we're saying right now is just a pile of excuses, but that's because we don't have trust. So now in an effort to expose transparency in the effort, we're hoping that people could see some of these things as reasons and not excuses. So hopefully there's some transparency here that people can connect to. This is, oh, go ahead, Russ, sorry.
I was going to say that, and that's why I chose that example right there, is to showcase what we're up against in corrections. The expectation for optimal outcomes is very low. And we might go days or weeks or months or even years with optimal outcomes, but when you have a broken system, eventually, that optimal outcome is going to go from an optimal outcome to an abject failure, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I love that. I said, as I said, people will quickly promise something that is not in their control, and then there's people that buy into it because, unfortunately, they buy into this perspective that corrections, at some level, is a very simple job, a very simple profession. Because remember, we're just babysitters when they don't realize how complex it is. I got multiple books I've written that, if anything, if you don't want to read it, exposes some complexities that I truly think add. And by the way, another thing, real quick, is it's funny. What adds to the complexity is simple solutions get surrounded by controversy over politics. When it's like, guys, there's nothing controversial in solving this problem. We're making it controversial. Let's be honest, and let's not worry about offending each other, and let's worry about resolving the problem. We're making it harder because we're more concerned about what we need to say so we don't offend the other party, as opposed to just really getting our hands dirty and fixing the problem. Effort over outcome, honoring the process. So outcomes aren't always within our control, but our actions are. Talked about that. Following the process ensures the facility can recover and learn. Success lies in the response and not just the prevention. And I think that, to me, matters the most, because I'll get to that, but basically, when we react to something, we're automatically seen as a failure, and that's unfair, because that also shifts the accountability. There's reaction that we recognize in corrections, or we should recognize as successful because we reacted. But the public will just see the reaction and note it as a failure because we failed to prevent. And that in corrections, we know you can't always, promise the preventive. And that's why we have staff there. We have staff there because we know nothing's perfect and we need reaction. We need people that can react. So to not honor reaction, it's like, well, then what are we even there for? Cutting corners may save time short term, but cost long-term control. And facilities that follow the process are safer and more stable. What's the key takeaway? So following the process is not just about compliance. It's a form of commitment that protects everyone. And the guiding question was, why is it so critical to honor the process, especially in moments where the outcome isn't perfect? And how does that reinforce long-term safety?
So, when I think about it, couched in those terms, we honor the process every day. We honor the response every single day. And if you're doing those things, and you're doing them, within the confines of, policy and procedure and state law and case law and all of those things, there's really only a couple of, what would I say? There's only a couple of different things that you can look at with regards to those, and that's this: is that either the policy and procedures and those are lacking if the outcomes aren't good, or those outcomes aren't possible. And so, if you stay within the confines of those things, maybe at some point you get a little bit, better chance to change some of the policies and procedures. Having said all that, I think like this particular point is, really hard to really, talk about much, because, we are left with the tools that we're given, and they're constantly, trying to take certain tools away. They're constantly, trying to, intercede even in the tools we have, and telling us, how we can use them and how we cannot use them. And it just makes what we do that much more difficult. While I'm a big believer in accountability, sometimes, what we look at is the mode of accountability that they want to see actually at some point becomes antithetical towards good correctional practices. And so it's a difficult It's a difficult wire to walk.
And you know, Russ, again, we're just so eye to eye on this. By the way, we don't discuss this. Russ gets surprised with the topic every time we go on. He has no idea what the topic is, and we just borrow from his experience in that moment. And Russ, I think when it comes to honoring the process, that's where the most shared investment should be in. To be honest with you, because the process is the effort, the process is the how, and I get the outcome. I get we all want to reach a certain outcome, but we really should all be invested in how that outcome needs to be produced. That means that we're all at the table discussing the best way to meet this effort. And I have a feeling when you get people that just push for outcomes and pressure outcomes that truly are out of their control, but it doesn't matter. They pressure, they add time, which urgency of time, which now puts more priority on the outcome than it does on the effort. Because to be honest with you, when you're pushing for time on an outcome in order to, push for some level of urgency, the problem is everybody quickly now looks at the process, which technically should be taking the most time, but it's not. We already minimized the amount of time because we put some urgency to it. Now, the investment that we should have, the dialogue, the long-term solutions that come from good, solid effort, they get minimized because people they got to push forward because there's some superficial pressure being applied because someone decided to put a timestamp on an outcome only really because, maybe safety and security, but for the most part, 90-something% of the time, it's because of vanity. And granted, even if it is a safety and security concern, it's the effort that should never be time stamped. And what I mean by that is we got to give people a chance to try to figure things out long term. So granted, we can handle things immediately and, give us a chance to kind of react and do what we got to do so we maintain a safe environment while we think of the long-term solutions. But if you don't honor the outcome, if you don't honor the effort, all the investment that should come from everybody actively working together, participating in, good long-term solutions based on the good and the bad of what can happen, which is truly embedded in experience. I know if we do this could happen. So you're looking at what's probable. You're also working with people who understand that every choice that made could go this way, not for paranoia. I'm not saying they're going to, come up with these extreme rare occasions, because then we also would have to mitigate that and say, hey guys, you're going too far. Now you're being resistant. We need this to happen. We need your solutions. We need to make this long term. So how do we go past whatever the obstacles are? All that discussion is embedded in the how that things are done. So I think when you honor the effort, you're also allowing for some level of shared investment in the discussion of what's going to make this outcome the most probable to produce. I didn't guarantee, but the most probable to produce. And when you have all parties that are involved in this investment, then you translate to some level as safely as you can do, what's working and what's not working. So now we have a developed process without the immediate need for an expected outcome. It's more, we're still working on it. But it's not about excuses. We're giving reasons because we're kind of doing it step by step and mitigating things along the way before it becomes a total failure. All right, so that pushes us over to building a culture of commitment. So culture is created through daily habits and not just policy. And I believe we discussed that. When effort is the norm, it lifts everyone's standards. And I agree with that. Real quick, I want to mention something with that. When you appreciate the effort, it keeps people more motivated and wanting to do the job as opposed to just recognizing outcomes. So you got to know when it's timely to appreciate efforts. And I think in corrections right now, we really need to start appreciating the routine, the basics, because right now these outcomes are becoming harder and harder to produce due to all the concerns we're facing, like understaff and burnout. So I think more effort should be applied by people from, everywhere, from management, outside, public, government, whatever it is, that we're recognizing, we're appreciating the basics, the hard work, and we're happy that it continues because in the end of the day, if you're waiting for a successful outcome, they're becoming harder to produce. And sometimes that appreciation allows staff to also know that they're going in the right direction. Then you got new staff model. So you get new staff modeling what they see around them. A strong culture helps navigate tough shifts and reduces burnout. And complacency spreads when effort isn't part of the environment. So what's the key takeaway? A facility's strength lies in its culture, and effort is the backbone of that culture. So Russ, how can we build and protect the culture of effort? And what happens when that culture starts to slip?
I think one of the big things is, to recognize your people in a way where they feel that, both their effort and their ideas are being acknowledged. They're not just there as a placeholder. So on some piece of paper, we can say, hey, yeah, we had enough people to cover the shift, or we had enough people, to do security rounds or whatever it is. They should feel that the effort that they put in impacts the result that you get. That it has a chance to influence the outcome. And not that we're going to get some magical optimum outcome all of a sudden, but they should feel invested in the process, because what that allows them to take away is to see value in what it is that they're doing. If their effort doesn't impact anything, how can there be any value in it? So they need to be recognized and acknowledged for that. While at the same time, you need to make sure that you're providing an environment that trains them up and allows them to identify what this process is. We know, and often staff are demoralized by what they see, as paper outcomes, where we have a different set of people, upstream from us, that are chasing outcomes that are based on changing definitions and what we enter on some, brand new form to fill out. And there's a disconnect between that and what goes on in reality, on the tiers and the ranges every single day. If those things that we're putting down on paper and those definitions that we're changing aren't making things better for us, then we really know that there's a problem, and that is what will erode the culture. If we feel that we are making a difference, irrespective of these things that we're affronted with in regards to paper outcomes and changing definitions, then at least we feel that we're being effective. But when the situation erodes, no matter what the effort is that we're putting in, we become demoralized. And when we become demoralized, the culture suffers.
Yeah, I agree, Russ. And this section here is it's outside in, but it's also inside out, because how we feel also manifests its way to the outside. And the two things that hit home with me was, when effort is the norm, it lifts everyone's standard. And that's true. Like, I think sometimes we get so caught up in the outcome or the pressure of an outcome that we can't produce, that we internalize failure. And maybe the failure really wasn't on the fact that we couldn't produce to the best of our level that outcome. It was more about the fact that the outcome was never within our hands to control. We were already playing a losing game. So now what happens is the focus becomes on the outcome as opposed to what you put in. And I think that when we do honor the effort, when we do honor people, pushing forward through these tough times, regardless of what the outcome is, but the intent is there and their commitment is there, they start to keep that same momentum. And it's great to separate the outcome at this point from the effort. And that tends to be the problem. People tend to put failures into an outcome that they couldn't produce, and they internalize the failures. And then ultimately that winds up sadly affecting their effort. So I think we need to do what we can to show appreciation to effort, so people start to realize that the effort is what matters the most. The effort is what that person can actually be responsible for producing. And the other thing I have is complacency spreads when effort isn't part of the environment. And me and Russ have covered this before many times, and this is more about the inside looking out, so this is more about ourselves, is that when you get caught up in complacency, you start teaching practices and not policy. And the next thing you know, the basics are gone, because the first thing that complacency attacks are the basics, the basics. So I definitely think, again, building a culture of commitment matters, because commitment leads to consistency, and consistency leads to expectations. That's the key. And ultimately, expectations is what we want, because that's what actually keeps the facility running where we need it to be. I always tell people, as an officer, you want to go from reactionary to eventually established expectations. All right, so the next thing I got, Russ, and this kind of leans towards the commitment, but the consistency, is the silent power of consistency. So most correctional success is invisible. Nothing happening is often the result of effort. So what I mean by that is, when people say, oh, the facility was successful today, nothing happened, that's not what I mean. It's the facility was successful today because everything went right, because everything that we did was where it needed to be. I want to put the outcome of that success into the effort of us doing our job, and not the outcome based on the inmates decided not to do nothing today, and that's why we were successful. No, it's not up to the inmates to determine some level of success or not. It's on our efforts that we put in. So most correctional success, like as I said, is invisible. Nothing happening is often the result of effort. Routine tasks done well prevent emergencies. Consistency makes inmates feel the rules are predictable and fair. It builds staff's confidence and operational stability. And consistency reduces chaos and reinforces safety. The key takeaway here, Russ, is consistency is the invisible success story of corrections. It's what creates peace behind the walls. Peace, I'm not going to say, peace technically. Why is consistency such a powerful and underappreciated force, Russ, in correctional work, and how can we better recognize and protect it?
If I was going to say, if there was perhaps, one thing that I felt that I was good at, one thing that I felt that I brought to the table, it was being proactive, and it was proactive in a consistent manner each and every day. And by being proactive, by putting in that type of effort, it allows you, two more P words here, as it were, which is being, preventative and preemptive. Your actions in a proactive manner allow you to prevent a lot of things and allow you to preempt a lot of things before they get the type of inertia and momentum going that they can blow up into a life-threatening situation of some sort. So, when I talk about those things, about, being proactive, about being able to be preventative and preemptive in the things that you do, just as an example, you can go out there and you can, make your rounds at night, for instance. But are you out there and making sure that all of the inmates are in their cells? Are you making sure that all of those inmates are alive and breathing? Are you putting in the effort that puts us in a position to either prevent or preempt something bad that could be, about to happen? Even if it's just, catching an inmate in the process of suicide, or maybe they're having a heart attack, or maybe they're even just already dead. But we've still gone through the process and effort to catch that as early on as possible. And so when I think about, what you've got written down there at the bottom of the screen, the silent power of consistency, it's those three things. It's being proactive, preventative, and preemptive. And that puts us so far ahead with regards to, how our outcome is likely to be affected and impacted.
Yeah, I love that, Russ, because I think when it comes to consistency, it's commitment. Ultimately, I mean, you could equate them at some level, but commitment to the reinforcement of consistency, and that's the first thing that people tend to challenge. So I think a committed effort at being consistent is also something that should be more appreciated, because I don't think people realize all those interactions that we may not know about that tends to want to shift that person from being consistent or committed. So, I mean, just being able to recognize that, could recognize so many moments where that person was challenged and they stood by that challenge. Every day, someone is trying to break away from our consistency, from our commitment. So you got to assume that almost every interaction could be a potential for some break to be exposed at someone's ability to be consistent and more importantly committed. Again, committed is the feeling that motivates consistency. And I would also like to add on another thing, because I'm just reading some of the stuff that stick out here when it says consistency makes inmates feel the rules are predictable and fair. It just more in general, consistency is what leads to expectations, as I mentioned. If you good senior officers, to be honest with you, may once in a while go back to reactionary mode, depending on how problematic the inmate could be. But most of the time, they walk into a unit, they have a reputation. That reputation comes from consistent and committed efforts, so the inmates know what to expect from them, and the unit kind of runs with little direct impact from the officer, because they've already established something through that strength of committed, consistent effort. So there is a reward when you go through all those challenges. The reward is that you technically become less reactionary. I mean, there'll be times where you could get brought back to that, depending on how an inmate could be. But for the most part, a good, committed, consistent effort will eventually, in the long run, make the career a bit more manageable. And for the public to recognize that, that's something that you're not going to see, because these are basic interactions and where the challenge is presented every day. So it would be great now to put, as I said, this thought out there that, that committed, consistent effort is not as easy as people may think, because it's being challenged. Think about that, guys. You're dealing with inmates that are looking to gain some level of control back into a world where they feel that they don't have any control. So for a fact, every interaction is going to be a dynamic where the control can shift. So you always do have the push and pull to maintain that control. And that's where a good committed effort comes in. So, yeah, and I like what Russ said, the three components and the silent power. Okay, so now we've got 4 more left. So real world contrast, when effort is there, when it's not. So the difference between a crisis and a controlled situation often comes down to effort. Small missed actions can lead to major consequences. One alert officer can prevent a suicide, stop a fight, or defuse a threat. Absence of effort leads to risk accumulation over time. And these contrasts are teachable moments. I like that thing where absence of effort leads to risk accumulation over time. Key takeaway: effort isn't a guarantee of success, but lack of effort almost guarantees failure. So, Russ, can you share an example where effort or the lack of it completely changed the outcome of a situation, and what lessons can we draw from that?
Oh, I think when I see the way you put it, we talk about risk accumulation. It goes directly back to the last one we just covered, with regards to putting in consistency. Consistency shields us from a whole host of different problematic outcomes, and so just in trying to think of an example of this, and trying to think of something that seems so small and so mundane, but you instantly recognize the potential for things going badly. I've placed inmates in handcuffs, certainly thousands, maybe probably tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of times over a long career. Sometimes hundreds of times a day in some situations. And so one of the consistent things that we learn is as we finish up our process and we check the amount within the restraint of where they can, you go in there and you pinch and you see if your fingers can touch, and then you make sure you take that little bit of effort to double lock those cuffs so they don't link, so that they don't end up getting smashed and creating a circulation problem. That is real world effort, but it's something that you often wouldn't even think about, and you certainly wouldn't be thinking about it if you were, average Joe citizen. But it's those little things, those little efforts that really count. Because although they may not crop up in a way that we see, that effort is, staving off and preventing and preempting those things. It really is, because when we do things like that correctly, we never see the results. And by never seeing the results, I mean we never see the bad outcomes. So I hope I picked a good example there, and just understand that these little real world things that we're faced with every day are things that we do have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, guys, we have a little work going on in the house. You may have some background noise here. I want to mention something too, because this does travel all the way up. If you don't have committed, if you don't have consistency or some level of committed effort, you'll never establish expectations. Things become a bit more confusing. So with that said, not only does that affect the inmates, but if you have no committed consistency up top, then what gets translated down below is a lot of ambiguity. And then people are just struggling because they themselves can't find their way. So consistency has to be also translated through communication, which means that, what are we trying to accomplish here? How are we trying to accomplish? And let's make sure we're all on the same page, because it's crazy how up top, when there's no communication amongst the different people, stuff gets passed down in so many different ways, and everybody has their own perspective on how it should be done and why it should be done. So I think that people need to also be connected and consistent on the intent and what we're trying to accomplish. And everybody has to be on the same page, because sadly enough, it becomes extremely ambiguous when we're not on the same page, not even just on the effort, but the why of the work, and the what needs to truly be accomplished. And again, communication's key for that. Okay, so the next part I got, Russ, and actually we're getting to it now. Leadership's role in setting the tone. So staff mirrors what leaders do and tolerate. So that's kind of what we just touched on, but I'd like to explore that a little bit more. Leadership, visibility, follow through, and consistency shapes the work culture. When leaders show effort, staff feel empowered to do the same. A disengaged leader undermines everything the team is trying to build, and what's accepted by leadership becomes the baseline. So, what's the key takeaway? Efforts start at the top. Leaders don't just shape policy, they shape culture through presence and consistency. So, Russ, how do leaders influence the culture of effort within a facility, and what can they do daily to reinforce that standard?
So I think that this is kind of a thing where you think about the push pull effect. Our leaders, and by leaders, I think I need to quantify that a little bit. Leaders that are in supervisory or managerial positions, where the leadership rests more on what's on their collar than what's inside of them. Because they have the potential to really shake things up in both bad and good ways. Setting high expectations, but in a way that those high expectations translate to a better culture, if you were, is really important. But merely ragging on people and breaking them down, and causing the culture to erode is the bad part of that. So true leaders, or I should not true leaders, but positional leaders, should be really mindful of how they're coming across to their subordinates, and about how they should be working. Most of all, not about implementing policy and procedure, but about fostering a culture of mutual respect and understanding, so that there is a level of communication that can take place where you can bolster and float everybody's boat, so to speak. Because too often, there's people in those positional roles where it's just, top down edicts, and they just expect obedience for obedience's sake, without respect to the mission that we have to pull off each and every day.
Yeah, and guys, you know what's funny? When you have leaders that are based on vanity, they may not always want to be so transparent with failed efforts. So again, for a leader, sometimes you got to be humble because you have to build trust with your frontline people. So it's good to show exhaustive efforts, maybe even ask for help if needed, because that builds trust. Because you also don't want your frontline people judging you only by outcomes that you can't produce. You're going to build your strength in that relationship through your exhausted efforts. And frontline should also be open to the fact that, you're trying, because obviously they should also not be so selfish where they're more focused on an outcome than they are an actual solid effort, because that's only going to disenfranchise the leader. Same thing with the public. When the public starts to understand more about what it takes to kind of run a facility, the effort to maintain things, maybe they could be a little bit more forgiving with leadership, which will ultimately put less pressure on their push for the outcome when the outcome is in their control to produce. But again, the leadership has to translate as best they could the importance of effort, and that means they also have to be seen. Sometimes those efforts have to be seen by your people so they know that you value the effort, because it keeps them pushing. I mean, I know a lot of people see management maybe with their feet on their desk doing nothing, but in my experience, that's not the case. They're working. It's just, it may not be seen. So I think when you become more transparent with the effort, it allows staff to kind of want to step up their game as well. Because if my management's doing it, if my supervisors are doing it, then I better step out. I better step up before I get called out. I think that, I mean, you want to step up for the right reasons, but for the people that, maybe a little lazy in their ways, when everybody's working, you're going to get called out on it pretty quick. I recognize that too. Like if you have a facility that's moving at a fast pace, the people that don't keep up with that pace get called out by their peers, get called out by management, because everyone is doing something to maintain that momentum. But again, if the leadership's not doing it, then who the hell are you to hold anybody accountable? Because you yourself haven't stepped up to hold the most important person accountable first, which is yourself. And you are accountable to your own efforts. All right, 2 more spots for us, then we're done. When the public values the wrong thing. So the public often praises incident-free facilities, even if data is manipulated. The pressure can lead to cover-ups and denial instead of honest reporting. Staff get demoralized when effort isn't appreciated. Only optics are. Only optics are. Transparency and professional response should be what's celebrated. And we must change the narrative to value honesty over artificial perfection. Now, what's the key takeaway? We need to shift public praise from illusion to integrity. So you see what we did there too, by the way? Effort and outcome, if you switch it, has been equated to illusion versus integrity. The integrity is in the effort. The illusion could be an outcome of a false promise or a guarantee into an outcome. I like that. And then now, Russ, here's the question for you. What's your favorite breakfast cereal? No, I'm kidding. How do we change the public narrative so they understand and value real effort and professionalism over manipulated success stories?
Well, I think we might. I think we might be starting with a false premise there, because I don't know that you can change that, because the mechanisms that affront us. First of all, we have the media out there. We have media that's largely ignorant, unwilling to learn, and that go around with their Dunning-Kruger effect on a daily basis, because somehow they know better than generations of trained correctional professionals. So I don't know that the word can ever necessarily get out there. It's absolutely true, though, that the public tends to value the wrong thing, in that they think that the absence of really strong, strict, and demanding security practices, is going to translate to an inmate population, that's going to, stand around, hold hands, and sing "Kumbaya" all day long. I think that, by and large, some of the public wants to hide their head from just how bad some of these. I'm not going to say that every population is horrible, but many of them, are truly terrible. I mean, go walk into, any given death row in the United States, or any, level 4 lockup, or even a level 4 mainline, for that matter. And the people that you're going to come across there, those particular inmates, or incarcerated person, because we're trying to relieve them of any responsibility for how they got into their current situation, is going to be someone who is a threat, by and large, to the public. And so I think that the public always expects more. That's one thing I hear all the time. Well, there's no programs. Well, there are programs, right? They're being given those programs. Is the dosage high enough? Maybe, maybe not. But what's impacting the dosage? Oh, the constant violence, the fact that they're smuggling in drugs, and you just start listing all of the things, and what the public has as a real expectation is not realistic.
Russ, you're spot on. And I think, kind of like touching on what we touched on before, it is going to be a persistent effort. And you're right. I think the narrative is an outcome we can't control. So even when you ask that question, how do we change the public narrative? You can't. I mean, you could push effort into it. You can hope that they're open enough to change, but that outcome is on them. I think that technically what we could do is be a little bit more transparent with effort. If there are concerns that showcase failures, maybe explain why these failures have occurred. And then once you build trust, excuse becomes reason, as we talked about before. So if there's trust, it's not that we're going out there on a platform to minimize accountability. Rather, we're taking accountability, but we're trying to give the reasons why. I think when you have lack of trust, I think that's a problem too, because every time you try to make an effort to take accountability when it does fall into your hand, if there is a lack of effort, instead of people seeing it as a dialogue to try to learn and move forward, they see it as us just coming up with a bunch of excuses. So even if I say, hey, I'm going to come on and embrace accountability for the field of corrections, these are the things that went wrong. These are the things that could have gone better. But in all fairness, I would also like to suggest other concerns that may have related to the problem that may have been out of our control. And all of a sudden, they don't want to hear that second half. It's not about that. It's 100% this way and 0% that way. And I don't think that's always the case. I think that, there is a time, yeah, it may be. I mean, the issue in New York with the killing of that inmate is 100% on the profession, unfortunately. What I mean by that is the individuals who did the job, who unfortunately took that inmate's life. That's 100%. There is no excuse for that. There is no reasoning behind what they've done. That's just a bad example of what we are and who we're supposed to be. But with that said, there are times where there are concerns that are kind of accountability could be shifted in so many different directions. So I think when one party comes up and embraces accountability and steps in and says what they've done wrong and what they could do better, then other parties should also step up and become invested in that dialogue. So it's not so one-sided, and basically we share accountability, because when you have shared accountability and things that require shared accountability, then you're moving up in a manner that is not so one-sided and resistant. Because now imagine if we all have a partnership effort in accountability, we're all going to want to see us succeed and get, move past what just happened. But if we don't, and you got one party stepping up and the other party doesn't, well, then you're going to get resistance. It's like, hey, guys, we weren't wrong on this whole thing. And then now you're not moving up. It just becomes a resistant effort because one side tried to compromise, the other side didn't. So I think the public has to be more invested in kind of looking at the situation from an objective level and seeing if it's always the system that could be blamed, or if there some shared accountability in which the system was trying their best. Maybe they could have done things a little bit better, but full accountability here is not on the system. Full accountability right now is all parties that were involved. One example here is sometimes people say, well, that facility there, man, that facility has a crazy drug problem. It's not the facility that has a drug problem. It's the people in it. So, we may be shifting accountability even by just saying things like that. But if we start saying, man, the people in that facility, they have some serious drug problems, that opens up a better perspective as what may need to be done. Because if I say the facility has a drug problem, the accountability goes on 100% accountability goes on the facility. Now instead of the facility being part of a concern, because it could be, and taking measures, it becomes the full concern. So now the accountability shifts away from the people who have choices, who are making bad choices, and totally focuses on the facility and not doing enough, when the facility, like Russ said, is doing the best we could. So just by shifting the narrative, it could shift to where, the people in that facility have a drug problem. So how do we help the facility? How do we help the facility address those individuals? Just that shift of perspective can change how we approach whatever the resolution would be. Now, the last part, Russ, you agree with that, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It's what is the expectation? Why does the problem exist? Well, the problem exists because you have a bunch of addicts inside that particular institution that are willing to do anything to chase the drug, and or you have super hardened criminals that are willing to provide that to them at any cost, somehow smuggling it in. So,
yeah. And then the last part I have, Russ, is kind of the final message. I thought this was a great dialogue. So the final message, I just want to got one last question for you, Russ. Can't escape just yet. Effort is the real promise, and that makes sense to me. So you can't promise perfection in this line of work, but you can promise effort. Showing up, staying engaged, and following through are within everyone's control. That promise builds credibility and stability in the long run. Effort is the invisible thread that holds everything together, from staff unity to public trust. This is the true standard we should measure ourselves by. What's the key takeaway? Effort is the real promise corrections can make, and the most important one to keep. Guiding question, Russ. I really want to read that key takeaway again. That was strong. Effort is the real promise corrections can make, and the most important one to keep. So, Russ, in a profession full of challenges and unknowns, why is effort the most meaningful and dependable promise we can offer, both to each other and to the public?
I think, because if everything else is equal, effort is the one thing that you have power over, in how much of it you exert on any given day, on any given shift. And so that's the one thing that I think every single corrections professional has that they can actually impact is how much effort they're exerting and where they're exerting it at. And so if they are doing, those two things in a mindful way, putting in the effort and directing it towards points where they're going to, have maximum impact, that's the way that they actually provide, value to the public, how they provide value to the institution, how they provide value to their peers, and how they provide value to the inmate population as a whole.
I agree. And I think our whole dialogue today really was centered on this last thought. How do we shift from being outcome driven to effort driven? And maybe it's about being more transparent with effort, or just understanding that these false promises that people believe can be accomplished really are not within our control. And our job is to do what we can to mitigate these concerns. But to sit there and say, I imagine if I told an officer, if I was a supervisor, so let's look at this the most, zoom in, zoom out type perspective. Let's look at this most immediate level, and something so simple. If I was a sergeant and I went up to one of my officers, now hopefully someone from the public is watching this, and I'm going to do it at a very immediate scale and then just apply it at a greater level. I go up to the officer. So let's say Russ is the officer. Hey, Russ, how's your day today? Doing good. Russ, if anything happens in your unit today, you're going to lose your job. Would that be unfair to Russ? Would everybody agree that would be unfair to Russ? Because Russ, in this case, is in a unit with 120, let's say, of the worst inmates possible. The worst inmates possible. So what I'm going to do today as a supervisor is I'm going to put this fucking crazy pressure, this impossible expectation on Russ that says, Russ, you are literally accountable, not responsible. I'm going above that. I'm saying you are accountable for every action in here. So with that said, if anything goes wrong, a fight between two inmates in their cell, let's just say, or whatever it is, you will lose your job today. That's kind of what we're saying. You could probably raise that up to the higher level. Think about some of the accountability that you're pushing down from the outside in, and are you asking for an impossible expectation? That's the key. Are you asking for an impossible expectation? Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I thought this was, a good dialogue. I think that, doing particular, talks like this is, really good, especially for those coming into the profession. It may not be something that they can really apply right away, but, maybe we can, give them the words and concepts to take with them as they progress through their career and as they, promote up. And as they, get into those positions of power to try and make things, better, not just at the lower levels, but at all the levels, through their respective, departments or units, facilities, whatever it is. And so that's why, sometimes it's the gray matter causes that are really going to hopefully impact corrections. Hopefully in the not too far distant future, but hopefully more immediately earlier on.
Yeah, guys, I have a final thought written here for me. So correctional officers are really praised for the effort they give, but it's that very effort that holds the system together. You won't always see it in the headlines. You might not hear about it from the podium, but behind those walls, effort is being made minute by minute, shift by shift, even in the darkest moments. That's the promise of corrections. Not perfection, but presence. Not guarantees, but grit. And in the end, that's what truly keeps people safe. So always, guys, the show is Tear Up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.